we're back in the shop, and this winter we've got several bodies to mount. This is the first one. This is a road course car for a customer. I'm really excited about getting this project going. I thought, you know, since we've got bodies to mount, I've had people ask me about doing a body video. Now would be a good time to start. So even though that this is a road course car, a lot of the things are the exact same as far as, you know, how you'd mount it for an oval track car, you know, etc. So a couple things to do first. First and foremost, make sure your suspension is exactly where you want it. Make sure the rear end is square, you know, you have the correct lowers, uppers, spindles, the caster, the width of the front, the offset in the rear end. Make sure everything is perfect. The last thing you want is to spend, you know, the next 40 hours hanging a body, and then after you do your setup, your tires don't fit the wheel wells because something was incorrect as far as the way the car was, you know, mocked up to hang the body. So make sure all your suspension is correct. Secondly, make sure you're on a good flat surface, my plate as you see, and then get your car blocked up to the exact heights that you want to mount that body at. Right now I've got the car sitting on 4-inch blocks all the way around, and this is going to give me a good platform to get the body on correctly. That's the way that the roof jig was built. It was made to mount bodies at 4 inches. I'm on 4 inches. I'm exactly where I want, within literally a 64th of an inch, and I'm ready to get hammering on hanging this body. So real quick before we do that, I'm going to show you the tools that I have out. I usually just set up a folding table and get all my tools laid out just so that everything's right there at arm's reach. I don't have to be running around the shop all day trying to find little pieces that I need to do work on this thing. So here's the tools we need. I've got about every clamp that I can find when I get ready to start mounting a body. You're going to use different clamps for different situations, so having a selection of them just really makes life easy. I've got my straight edge. I got a couple of different squares, tape measures, tape. You're actually going to use a lot of tape when you're marking out rivet holes or cut lines. I've got a notepad so I can make notes on it. I've got my air tools. I've got two different drills, one set up with 3/16, one set up with 1/8 inch. That way I don't have to be swapping drill bits back and forth. And then I've got my rivet box, my fastener box with all my clecos in it. I've got two of them. This is 1/8 inch, this is 3/16. By keeping that stuff separate, it just makes life a lot easier again. Now that we covered the tools, we covered how to get the car on the plate, where to get it at, making sure the suspension's correct, we're ready to start jamming this body on here. So again, a couple of steps that I take before I actually start riveting panels on is you've got to prep these panels to get them on. You've got to put the two bumper halves together. You've got to get certain things cut out of panels just so that they're ready to attach, you know, like in the rear quarter where the hood pin bar goes. You got to do a little bit of relief work in there. Doing that stuff ahead of time just makes life easier when you're getting in there. A lot of times you'll get up in there and then you'll have to try to cut something out, and it's a real pain in the butt trying to cut it out with other joining panels on it next to it. So we'll do some of that work ahead of time. Sometimes you'll have to get those panels on, you'll have to mark them out and then take them back off so you can trim them. But yeah, we're ready to start putting panels on here and start locking them down with clamps, get everything aligned where we want it, and then we'll drill and rivet those or cleco those in place so that they don't move, and then we can move forward to the next panel. As you see, we've got the roof jig set up and we've got the roof held into place. The first thing you're going to want to do is get that roof front and the roof rear, the two pieces joined and either clecoed or riveted together. Lock them in place so that you can hang the body from there. You're going to go from the roof, after getting the roof locked in place, to the quarter panels, the rear bumper, the deck lid, then the doors, and then you'll work yourself forward from there. Nobody starts at the front and works back. They all start at the back and work front. And it's just the way it is. The way the panels overlap, you tend to put the door over top of the quarter panel, the fender over top of the door, and it just makes a seamless airflow that way. So start with your roof, get your roof where you want it, get the roof locked down, go to the quarters, and then so on. As you can see, the two roof halves are already married. They are seamed, they're locked down together. And that's basically your first step. You can't do anything until you got that roof together and kind of in its rough location. After you get that, you're allowed to go ahead and maybe mount the roof, or I prefer to get the quarter panels and the rear bumper on it, get those locked into place, and then I will go back and do my roof mounts. It just makes life a lot easier when you have more stuff holding it together. It's kind of like an eggshell. the smaller the pieces, the harder they are to get locked down and get into where the exact spot you want them. Making that eggshell a little bit bigger, putting a template on it, knowing that it's all going to fit correctly, then bracing it up to the chassis just seems to be a little bit easier, a little more consistently perfect. Since the roof halves are done now, we are ready to attach the quarter panels with clamps. Before I go ahead and do that, I don't want to rip all this plastic off and then leave this quarter panel vulnerable to getting scratched or dinged. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove it back a little ways off these edges, and then I'll use my masking tape to stick it down so that I know it's not going to pick up later, or it's not going to get in my way. Now that I have both quarter panels taped, I'm ready to cleco on the rear bumper. Notice how I spaced out my rivets by about 2 inches, and I try to keep them as low as possible so that that rear seam is nice and tight. When I drill those, I don't just drill through the one way, because then that'll have an angled drill bit, and when I rivet it, it may pull it at a little bit of an angle and offset those two panels. So I drill it one way, I go back and I drill it through the other way really lightly, and then I put my rivets in. I also use big, large rivet washers when I do this to help spread that load out so that you don't get kind of a waviness in there. Now, before I put this in, I'm going to have to notch this corner of the quarter panel out on both sides. This is where the rear bumper overlaps. In the past, I've taken and I've slit that out with my die grinder. I've just cut a slot out of it, but then it just kind of gets this waviness to it. By doing it this way, and then when I put the deck lid up underneath, it just keeps it nice and flat, and it keeps this from getting any sort of a angle to it, and it just keeps it nice and tight. When I trimmed this out, I took my file and I filed it just to make sure there was no sort of a vertical lip there. I want this to sit as flush on my bumper as I can. I noticed when I was putting the bumper up in there that the thickness of this quarter panel here on this corner has got the bumper kind of dropped down, and the heights are incorrect on it, so I've got to do a little bit of work to get that corner to fit just a little bit tighter. So I'm going to file that out just a little bit so that it's consistent with the thickness of the rest of the panel, just so that it fits right and it looks good. Now that we have the two top corner clecos in place, we know where we want this. This is kind of locked in place. Now we've got to locate our side and down the side. The first thing I'm going to do before I drill a single hole is I'm going to measure out all my rivets so that they're all perfectly spaced. I can do the math so I don't have to have one right in the center of that corner. I could put one on top, or I could put one on the side. I'll probably put one on the top here and just do my math here so that it's centered up on this one. By spacing out those rivets, measuring them, it just looks a little bit more professional. And if you're going to drill holes, you might as well just grab a tape measure. It only takes a few more seconds. After we get those the top of the quarter panel locked down, we can work our way down the side. And there's a couple of tips I'll give you here as we go forward and get to that point. But as of now, I'm pretty happy with the way it looks, and I'm going to go ahead and secure the top. We've now got this side fully attached, and what I do is I always go through and I do every other rivet. That way, if I don't like the way something's at, there's less holes that I have to try to clean up. There's no repairing a hole. You basically, if you don't like where you put a hole, you're kind of stuck with it. So I try to use as minimal as I can to try to lock it down until I'm happy with it. These are also 1/8 inch Clecos. When I'm done, I'm going to put 3/16 rivets in this, but again, I want to use the 1/8 inch, because if I start using 3/16 now and I go in and out and in and out over and over and over, if I put a rivet in, I have to drill it out, then those holes start to get oversized and we run into issues. So with having 1/8 Clecos in it now, I can drill them out later and have a nice tight 3/16 hole for my rivet. But now that the back bumper is attached to the quarter panels, now we know that our quarter panels are parallel and the width of our deck lid is correct. Now I'm ready to go through and reset those quarter panels to that roof flange, and then I can lock those down. At this point, we're just clamped on that flange. And the reason I do this is sometimes when you go through and you get these clamped down, there may be just a little bit of a variance, and it may not line up just right, and then you get your deck lid in, your deck lid doesn't fit right. So because I know what the width of my deck lid is based off the bumper, and I'll actually set my deck lid in here in just a moment to verify the fitment of it, when I go through and I lock these down, I can adjust these around a little bit and clean up those edges. And if there is a variance there, then I could split the difference, you know, either front, back, or however. Okay, now we've got the quarter panels locked into place. I just used some variety of vice grips to kind of lock them down on that seam. This does take two people to do this. You will have to have somebody underneath clamping it while you're trying to force it into place. And the best way I found to get these lined up is to take a square and run them up to where they feel flush, and then check them with your square. As long as you're nice and flat on that bottom seam, you've got her whipped. Here's the look from inside with my clamps on that seam. Now I'm ready to go through, measure out all my holes, pre-drill them all, I'll Cleco it, I'll verify fitment, and then after I verify that everything's correct, I'll go ahead and rivet it down. While leaving the clamps on, I've got it drilled and Clecoed. All my Clecos are nice and spaced out. I'm trying to keep them as close to that top seam as I can without disturbing that seam. And that's just going to keep it nice and tight up there so no grime, no rubber, no grit gets in there. I'm going to go ahead and double check the fitment. And as long as the fitment's still good, which it feels really good, I'm ready to rivet that down. Always double check the fit. This is your last chance to get it right. And if you just go ahead and start throwing rivets in that thing, then you come back and you find out you've got a high spot here, it's not going to be possible to fix it without drilling that hole out. Now you start getting that hole oversized and it just turns into a mess from there. So always double check your fitment and take those extra steps, those slow steps, to make sure everything's right, because you'll pay dividends on the end with the car. It looks really good. Now that I'm ready to rivet it, I'll pull every other Cleco out and put those in while leaving the other set. And then once that set is riveted down, I can pull the final Clecos out and put those in. This just helps ensure that nothing moves on you. Alright, now that I got that set of rivets in, I'm ready to pull the final Clecos out, and I'm still going to leave my clamps on there until I'm completely done, then I'll pull my clamps off. Also, I did use backup washers on all of these. It just helps reinforce that seam so that that quarter pound doesn't get peeled off in an incident. It's just a bit stronger. They're really, really light, and it's just no reason not to use them. Now that all the rivets are in, I'm ready to unclamp everything and check it all out. In a spot like this where you have the deck lid, there's supposed to be a small gap there for alignment purposes. When you drill it, your rivet will go through. You can stick a washer in that gap to help take up that space, and then put your backup washer on the back side so that it's all locked together. From this angle you can see how my rivet goes through. I've got the washer in between and then the backup washer on it. This just helps ensure that that gap stays there for correct deck lid fitment. Now with the rivet pulled, you can see that that gap remains, and that's all that we need. All right, we're back in the shop today, and real quick we're going to touch base with where we've left off at. So the first thing we did was we got the roof kind of blocked up into our jig. We got the quarters just clamped on in a rough position so that we can get the rear bumper mounted. I'm happy with the rear bumper. We went through and we realigned the quarters. We've got them riveted in on both sides. All my rivets are spaced out. They look really, really good. There you can see the rivets. So now that we've got it all in one piece, I went ahead and I clipped the doors on it. I did put one cleco in the top corner just to hold everything together, and then a set of clamps. And I put my template on to make sure that my roof shape was correct before I start mounting the roof, before I start putting my roof brackets in. Now I've started putting my roof brackets in, and you can see I just use 1/2-inch tube. I smash the end of it, do a small radius, and I weld them in. A couple of things that I do first is I mark where I want them to go. I want them to go on the roof, but I do not want them to go in the reinforced area where you see that it's raised right there. I want them just to go in the fiberglass spot. Another thing that I do is I measure them so that they're in the same spot on this bar. I'm 13 inches from the rear hoop, and that's the same on both sides. Just consistency. That way, if you look through the quarter window, those are in line and you don't have this goofy look to them. Now I'm ready to go ahead and do the front ones. And real quick, I'm going to show you how I build those and how I make them pretty so they don't just look all goofy, big, and janky. All right, so here's my 1/2-inch material. It's just 1/2-inch 065 round. I put it in the vise and I just smash it. You're going to want to smash about, I don't know, about 3/4 of an inch on the end. And I always take where the seam is and put it against one jaw. If you were to bend this and the seam was up, it has a chance to kind of fracture down that seam. So I always lean it into the jaw, and then I just kind of run some rounds in it to smash it down. Now I'm going to take my hammer, and on the flat part of the vise, I'm just going to go ahead and tap that out so that I know it's as tight and flat as possible. Make sure you hammer both sides of it so that you know it's good and flat. Alright, now that I've got my piece flattened out, I'm ready to figure out where I want to put it. I can't put it up in here too far because it's really, really tight to the cage. So I need to be down on this A-post somewhere. So it looks like that thing's going to have to be a pretty steep angle on it. And then I'll go back and I'll grind this paint off and I'll attach it. I want to keep these as wide as possible because if you put them more towards the center, then the roof tends to kind of bow and it doesn't have the support out here on this corner where you need it. So by mounting this out here to the corner, you know, it's just a lot stronger. You may still need to go and add a support in the middle of the roof somewhere to make sure that your templates fit correctly. But at this point, I want to keep this thing as wide as I can get it just for that extra support. Now to bend this, I'm going to put it back in my vise. I'm going to keep it all the way up to the end so that I don't bend it halfway through this flange here. And I'm going to go ahead and just lean on it and put whatever bend I need. Now if you go too far, you can come back and you can straighten it out. Or if you need more bend, you can come back over here and you can add some to it. That looks like that's going to work. It's going to be nice and high, tight, nice and short, nothing extra. Now that I'm ready, I verified that my angle is correct. I'm ready to go ahead and trim this up, do a little bit of grinding on it, and just, you know, sanitize it a little bit. This is going to look goofy if I just rivet this in, weld it in. It's just too much material, so I can shave some of that material off with my belt sander just by radiusing those corners down a little bit. Now I've just got to set it up in there and figure out where my length is so I can start cutting. I've got my angle cut, I'm radiused out, I'm ready to weld it, but before I weld it, I'm going to drill a hole in my mount, I'll drill a hole in the roof, and I'm going to cleco them together, and then I will tack it into place. This ensures that I've got it exactly where I want it, and I'm not holding the body where it's not happy. And you can see I've got my cleco in, I've got my bracket in there, it's ready to be welded. There should not be any pressure on that at all. That should just sit against that bar. If it's got any pressure on it, then it's holding your body where your body's not comfortable. And there we go. It's all tacked in, ready to go. So when I'm doing these, I will go through all the steps and I will get it clecoed in and tack welded in before I go on to the next one. This just ensures that that spot stays locked down and doesn't move. And I mean, if I was to do all 4 of them and then go through and weld them, it may move, you know, a 16th or an 1/8 and throw it out of whack. This just, like I say, it just keeps the consistency, make sure nothing moves. And there we have it. All 4 of our roof mounts are in. Like I say, we may need to add a couple in the center just to get the templates to fit correctly, but it's that simple. Got the 2 back ones in, ready to move on. Now that we've got the roof mounts in and we know where the roof is in its spot, we're ready to mount the back of the deck lid. I'll put a bar in across there and then I'll build supports down to the frame. Once that's locked down, the roof's locked down, we can pull the jig loose and start attaching the rest of the body down the sides, the cowl, and move forward from there. But this is basically the main body mounts, those 4 roof mounts and that deck lid mount. That's what locates everything. That's like your foundation for your body mounting. Everything else from there, it gets added later on, but this is the start. And I'll be honest, I'm really happy with where it's at. We've got great wheel well locations on both sides. All of our heights are correct, quarter panel heights, roof heights. I've had the template on it. The template seems to fit really, really well. I do have to do some work to raise the cowl panel, but yeah, moving forward. I'm ready to start building my Decklid support bar, and for this I will be using 1 by 1/2 inch 0.65 rectangle tubing. I marked the center so that I can go back to the same spot every time, and then on these ends I'm going to mark them, and I'm going to cut a small pie out of those so that I could tweak them over and then re-weld it, grind it down, and I'll have a nice bar that goes forward on this quarter panel so that I could attach it here rather than just ending it here at the end of the deck lid. This is going to provide some extra support out here on the corners, and it's going to keep them from dropping down, you know, through heat cycles, sitting out in the sun, or even a little bit of contact. It's just going to help keep that quarter panel corner up. I'm going to do this on both sides. You know, like I say, you just want this thing to be up and supported. You can see where my angle is at here and how much further I have to go, but there you can see where I V'd it out. I did not cut all the way through on this back side. I just wanted to be able to cut out enough to where I could knock that over and then weld it back up. Same thing on this side. This side's a bit closer, but you can see I still have a little ways to go. So I'm going to notch some more out of that, and we're going to get it to fit correctly. I like those angles. Now I'm ready to weld this up. I'm going to weld it up, grind it down, and finish this piece because I know this is where it's going to need to stay. There's no sense in just tacking it. I might as well just finish it out. Both sides are right where I want them, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and then I'm going to install it to the bumper. I've got it all welded and ground up, and I did grind both sides of it just so that if one of my supports came in the bottom, I didn't have to worry about the weld getting in my way. So it's all cleaned up, ready to go in. I've now got my rear deck lid bar in its entirety. It's clecoed all the way across. I've got it clecoed all the way to this corner. This pin right here is in the bar. All the way across here, you can see how nice they're spaced out. They're all in a perfect line. I'm clecoed all the way out to this one, and now I am ready to install my uprights. So these are my pre-made uprights that I've already built. This is 3/4 0.65. This is 7/8 0.65. The 3/4 slides in it near perfectly. I cut it to a shorter length, and then I drilled a hole and welded a set screw in the back of it. This way we can adjust it and then bolt it down tight so it doesn't slide. these are now ready to install up to the deck lid bar. I do have to adjust them, get them into the right spot, but I can tack weld those in and be ready to pull my roof jig off. I've now got the bottoms tacked on. I used 3 tacks, kind of do them in like a triangle pattern, 1 in the front and then 2 off the sides and the back. This way it supports it side to side and forward and back, so I know it's not going to move. I used my square to make sure that they were perfectly vertical so you don't have them running at wonky angles. Now I need to attach the top. But before I can attach that, I need to go through and double check all of my measurements to ensure that it's right and nothing's moved. Once I lock those down, it's going to keep the back from moving side to side as well as front to back, up and down. And if that's not in the right spot, then I've got to cut something loose later on down the road. So always double check your measurements before you final weld stuff. Alright, I've got those tacked in now and I'm happy with where my heights are. Before I can weld this up, I've got to remember that this is plastic, and if I go to start welding that, it's going to distort this and melt the top of this bumper. There's a couple ways around that. One, the best way is just to remove the bumper off of this bar, then you know for certain it's not going to melt this. Two, if you can't remove that, take a wet rag and keep it in a bucket of water, so when you weld this, you weld about 1/4 of the way around or 1/3 of the way around. Take that soaking wet dripping rag and wrap it around that and cool that, and then while you're welding, keep it on the top surfaces to keep this plastic cool. You can even pull this cleco out, give yourself a little bit of room there. Whatever you got to do just to make sure you don't distort this plastic bumper. Now, like I say, I'm ready to move forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vertical bar kind of at an angle on that corner, and I'm going to add the same thing on this side up to this corner to take this side to side slop out of that deck lid support. All right, there we go. That's all it takes. It's just something to provide a little bit of gusseting so that it doesn't move side to side as easy. It doesn't take a whole lot. I'm going to go ahead and hop in here and weld this stuff up. I've double checked it all. I'm happy with it. I'm going to weld the bases. I'm going to weld this lower portion of the gusset bar, and then I'm going to pull the bumper loose, lift it up so I can weld the rest of that. I want to lock all this down to ensure that it doesn't move, and I can pull my roof jig off. I've got it all welded up. I've given it a little bit of time to cool, and now I'm ready to put it all back together. We're locked down on the deck lid support. I like where my body's sitting. We're centered up on the wheel wells. The offset is correct. I'm ready to pull this roof jig off. All my roof mounts are locked down. We're clecoed in. Let's pull this jig off, then we can put the rear bumper in. I like to pull this jig off before I put the rear bumper in, because if you look at this actually kind of rolls down just a little bit. So what I'll do next is I'll pull the roof jig off, and then I'll put a stand underneath this corner and lift that corner up to get that corner up just a little bit so it's the same height as my deck lid support. Even though that my deck lid support lands here, it's dropping a little bit till it gets to the outside of the quarter panel. So I want that as flat as possible to keep as much air on the deck lid as I can. So by doing this, by pulling the jig off, by putting stands under the back, lifting it up, and then putting my bumper in, I can just ensure that that is nice and flat. All right, as you saw, when I unhooked the roof jig, nothing moved. Everything is locked down in its spot. That's exactly what we were hoping for. As long as you go through those steps correctly, nothing will move. Everything will be in its right spot. So now what I was saying before is these quarter panels tend to sag a little bit, and as you can see, look how much sag this has got from where it ends at the Decklid bar to this outside corner. That is ugly, and you're losing a ton of downforce. So by adding a stand underneath this corner, you can kind of push it up where you need it. Watch what it changes here. Look how much flatter that is now. That's what we want. That actually might be a little bit too much. It's got a little bit of a dimple there, but I can adjust that by just sliding the stand back just a little bit. And we can get that nice and flat. We want that nice and flat. Same thing on this side. You can see how much that Decklid dives off after it gets, or excuse me, where that quarter panel dives off after it gets over that Decklid bar. Same thing. Put a jack stand under this corner and then just slide it forward till you get that spot smoothed out. Look how much better that is. A lot of guys, when they're cutting out their rear bumper seam for their bumper bar, they'll use a saw. They'll just cut it straight out. They'll kind of hack it out and it looks really terrible. I prefer to use a hole saw. And the reason I do this is your bumper is round, so why should your hole not be round? It's a nice, easy way to cut through. You can get right against the rear surface so that when you rivet it, you drill through the back, you rivet it directly to the bumper. It's nice and tight. To do this, make sure your drill is nice and flat against the bottom seam as well as the back of the bumper cover. Sometimes these seams are too tight to actually drill through with your drill bit of your hole saw. So just laying it down in there and cutting it is actually a pretty decent way to go about it. Cut through the first half going the one direction and then come back through the other side and drill the other way. Now we just got to go through and do a little bit of cleanup on it, and it'll be a really, really nice cut surface. Now, I know it's hard to see, but it's an absolutely perfectly smooth run across that seam. So now when you rivet your bumper to it, it stays nice and tight and there's no gap. You can see from this side, it's just a perfect cut. Next up, I clamp in the rear bumper exactly where it's supposed to go. You can see how nice and flat it is to that lower return flange. And on this side, you can barely see the bumper right there, but it's a nice tight fit. There is no gap at all. The lower you can run your bumper bar, when somebody gets into the back of you, the less chance they have of lifting you up. Say if you had your bumper bar mounted way up here and someone got underneath the back of you, that bumper is going to distort and it runs more of a risk of picking up the back of your car and getting you free. The lower you can run that, you have the possibility they might be able to run in the back of it and not lift you up as much. So try to keep that bumper bar as low in the rear cover as you can. We've got the whole rear bumper attached now. I've got my bumper with my bumper mount, 5-star scent bumper mount kits with this body. That is the 1.5 by 1.5 square. This car had an existing tab on it for the bumper mount, so I went ahead and I used that. Also included in the kit was this bumper support rod with a weld-in bung on this end, and then this mount that we've tack welded to the frame there. Those are actually to build a lot of support. Whenever this bumper has just got the single arm on it, it tends to hinge really easily if someone gets into you. So adding this support rod builds a lot of strength into that. I decided to put it there because that was an existing mount that had been cut and ground off I didn't grind it myself, but I noticed there was a little bit of stop signing, kind of some flatting on that bar where they grounded it. So by putting it there, I can kind of hide some of that when they paint this or powder coat this thing in the future. Again, same thing on this side. Turned out really well. I will weld these nuts to those tabs. You can see it there, that nut. That way it only takes, you know, one socket to take this bumper on and off rather than having a pair of wrenches. Now that I got the bumper supports in, I can pull my jack stands out and look how nice and flat that Decklid is. Beautiful. Normally when I'm building a bumper for a car, I'll weld on these little weld bungs that go right into the end of the frame, but I always do the support rods. Another look at the weld bungs that I put in. This one isn't finished welded. This is on the front of my modified, but they're nice little threaded weld bungs. You can see again here in the back of my modified, the weld-in mount. It's just a really easy way. They're good, they're strong. If they get screwed up, just run a tap back through them. Here is the kit that comes from 5-Star, and that's the little weld bung. It's pre-milled down so that all you got to do is slide it in the end of your tube and weld it up. They come with these little saddles here. That's the saddle that's welded to the frame. They come with all the bolts and nuts you need. It's a really simple, simple way to do it. I highly suggest in investing in that if you're going to mount a body. It's just an addition to your body kit, and it saves a lot of time. I'm ready to weld everything up on this. Again, when I weld up the bumper tubes, I will pull these clecos out and get that bumper away from that bumper cover so that I don't melt anything in the backside. But I'm ready to weld this all up, and then this is going to conclude this video. We will have another video. I'm planning on having this car done this week, so I'm going to crank out another video, which will be the doors, mounting the nose, and then the third video will be the windows, the hood, fender supports, tying up all those loose ends, hood hinges, hood pin bar, getting all that final stuff finished up. But I hope you guys learned something. These are just the systems that I use, the ways I use to go about mounting a body. Had this been an oval track car, I could have leaned the body over a little bit more to the right at the back to try to keep some air on that spoiler. I could have hiked it around a little bit and twisted it up. But this is a road course car, so I wanted everything to be mounted straight and square. And I mean, I think it turned out really, really well. I'm really happy with it so far. Like I said, I'm going to get back on this thing, weld this stuff up. If you like the video, like it, share it, subscribe. My whole goal is just to help guys that are doing this stuff to not have to pay a guy like me to do it. You can do it yourself. And as you do it, you learn new techniques, you try new things, and it makes life a little bit easier. And in the end, you save a lot of money. Racing is an expensive sport, and anytime you can save money, that's a positive. So thanks again, and wait for a few days. Catch the next one.